Well, it's noontime right here on 90.3 WEJF. 90.3 WEJF Radio, and it's our lunchtime gathering. I'm Kerry Fink. I have the privilege of working with the 100% local to Brevard County nonprofit called Helping Seniors of Brevard. And a special shout out to our founder and chair emeritus. His name is Joe Steckler. He's the guy that got the whole ball rolling on this. And today we have one of our longtime dear friends of the Helping Seniors organization in the studio with us. It's none other than Dr. Lee Sheldon. How are you today, Dr. Sheldon?
All right, Kerry, I'm doing well. And how are you doing today?
I am so excited. It's always fun to get on the radio, even if it's a little chilly here in Florida this time of year. Although people up north are probably just snickering at us with all they've been going through.
I think so. You know, I have not told you this, but I'm going to Iceland at the end of this month. So,
oh, wow.
We'll compare Brevard County to Iceland, and then Brevard County won't seem so cold anymore.
You know, there was a day when my wife and I, Tammy, we lived in New York City, and we would think of 40 degrees as being a precursor to springtime. But now, anytime it gets below 60 degrees, we're like looking to build an igloo out in the backyard or something. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But it's, and then you see all the memes pop up on social media. You know, we've had our 3 days of winter now and we can get back to the beach. So it's always good to be here in Florida. And there's some really good things happening, Dr. Sheldon. We have a good show ahead where we're going to talk about the hopeless tooth that wasn't hopeless. I want to share, before we jump into today's topic, I want to share something exciting that I'm personally thrilled that we're having an opportunity to get involved in as the Helping Seniors organization. You know, when Joe established our organization, really, we're starting to move into our 15th year of service. You know, Joe said after building up those Joe's Clubs, they call them, building up successfully the Brevard Alzheimer's Foundation. So we have that great resource in our county. He said, you know, the work is not done. We have, he said, there's many seniors that are doing fine on cognitive challenges, but they're running into other things, and we have to find a way to make a difference there. And that's when he came up with the idea of creating Helping Seniors, and you signed up to help him. I was just a media guy, and I said, okay, Joe, let's see if we can help with, the radio and TV. And he goes, he says, I feel like the education part of this is so important because people sometimes, they're just not sure. And as Nancy Deerdorf, who's our director of development, likes to say, she says, how do you know what you don't know? And so the whole point of us gathering around the radio on Wednesdays is hopefully by the time we've moved through the show, you've got a couple of great new ideas. You've got some new ways of thinking, and maybe even some action steps that are going to help you live kind of, if you will, your best life now. And Dr. Sheldon, all those years ago when Joe came to you, you said, okay, Joe, I'll help you get this rolling. And thank God you're still help us to this day.
Well, I'll tell you, at this age, it's great to have these kinds of opportunities. You know, there are not that many people my age who are practicing dentistry anymore. And I have a unique opportunity here where I can do diagnosis without doing treatment. I can talk with patients without actually having to do the backbreaking work itself, which provides me with new material, and that's some of the material that we're going to be talking about today. But I'm going back on the lecture circuit to talk about some of this. The things that we've talked about on the air and off the air, and you experienced it with your conversation with Morgan yesterday.
Yes.
You know, Morgan gave her first presentation, first public presentation. She gave it to the Brevard County dental hygienists. It was hygienists that we invited over, and we all met at the Yacht Club. There were probably, upwards of 40 people there.
Wow.
And Morgan gave a presentation that was a first-class presentation. And, Morgan's an experienced hygienist. I don't know how long she's been doing it, but I have an idea. But she's an experienced hygienist, but she was not a public speaker. And all of a sudden, we take this person who's a very talented hygienist, and we put her out in front of the public, and she was nervous. Let me tell you, she was nervous preparing this PowerPoint. But she gave a presentation that was fantastic. So we're going to get a hygienist here. We're going to get her on the road, and we're going to have her educating hygienists and perhaps dentists within Florida and hopefully farther than that, because she has not only the talent to be an outstanding hygienist, but also to communicate what she does and teach others.
Wow. That's exciting. And I was smiling because my dad, who was a college professor, used to come up with the old saw. He said that those who do, and those who can't teach. And so it was always sort of a backhanded joke about his career. But, here it's the reverse. You're taking somebody who really can do, and now you're helping them really fulfill what they're able to do in terms of teaching. And, that's a thing that, Dr. Sheldon, we've talked about a little bit, but I'm not sure we've talked about enough. People always think like, oh, I have to go to this major metropolis to get like the best help or the best, for whatever situation. And the fact is that that's one of the things I don't know that people really understand, is that not only do you run like the top tier practice, for periodontist, general dentistry, all those different things you can do, everything from whole mouth restoration, all those kind of things that you see TV ads for. But what your real focus is on is mouth health. And so then the part that we don't see unless we talk about it is the fact that you also run organizations that help other practices maximize their success, and then you get involved in research projects. When I was in the dentist chair yesterday for my cleaning, and I'm happy to report that I got a good report, so thank you God for that. But at the same time, we were talking about the fact that we had done a radio show a month or two back where you were part of a panel that was figuring out how we could take a tool that was already in the dentist's office, apply it in a new way, and come up with a very cost-effective treatment that's really making leaps and strides kind of advances on mouth health when you're doing these cleanings.
Yeah, it is. And the fact that this material has been around for at least 25 years, probably 30 years, and now we're finding a totally new application for it. And not only that, I mean, I've been fortunate in my career to be able to work with top-level people, both within Brevard County and outside. I did a TV show for a number of years here, and that gave me an opportunity to meet physicians that I wouldn't have met otherwise. And within what we're doing, because of some of the things that you and I do together where there's a public speaking component, it gives me opportunities that I wouldn't have had otherwise. So when I was asked to be part of a research group, I'm not a researcher. I am a person who speaks, and at one time was able to do. And I think did pretty well. I'm not sure. We'd have to talk to your father about that. But it gave me opportunities to align myself with people who are doing research directly in the laboratory, and we could take their research and directly apply it here. So at that time, we were talking about something called microislands of calculus. Calculus being hard bacteria that stuck to the root surface. And no matter how well you clean the tooth, there were still little microislands of this calculus, this hard calcified material, which is toxic and has bacteria embedded within it. It was always stuck in the root. And what these researchers did was to clean a tooth as well as they possibly could, look at it under the microscope, and sure enough, they discovered the microislands. And then they applied this chemical, which is readily available and is cheap, and applied it to the tooth surface, and then looked at it under the microscope again, and most of those microislands were gone, which just enhances the non-surgical treatment that we do here every single day. It's always been my contention that periodontal disease is a chronic disease that you treat non-surgically primarily, and that kind of goes against the grain in a lot of periodontal practices. My goal always was to do surgery for areas where I could reconstruct. And so whether it was implants or adding bone or something like that to be able to create the environment for a good implant, that's where I concentrated my surgical skills. But given the fact that periodontal disease is a chronic disease, a degenerative disease, a disease of bacteria and immune system and all sorts of compromises here, I always felt that could be treated non-surgically. And here, because lets you and I do what we do together, and it gives me a PR venue, the ability to speak not just locally but nationally. As you know, here these researchers invited me to be part of their program, not because I'm a researcher, but because I have the wherewithal to apply the research and to be able to talk about it. It's given us opportunities within Brevard County, within our practice, that others don't have. Now, eventually they will, but right now, what Morgan is doing is almost singular. We are teaching others, but as with any new technique, it takes a while for it to catch on. And so very, very proud of Morgan and Frank, who do the load of the work here in treating periodontal disease, and they're taking the application that was discovered in the laboratory by Drs. Harrell and Dr. Cobb, and they're using Morgan actually gave it a new application, a new ability to make it easier for hygienists to actually scale and be able to treat teeth better. So wow. The original research, they were doing all the scaling and root planing that they could, all of the root preparation they could, and then they would apply the chemical. Morgan said, hey, why don't we apply the chemical first? It might make the scaling a lot easier. And sure enough, it has. And so Morgan is singular in that bit and is going to make it much easier for hygienists all over the country and perhaps all over the world. Since we have our YouTube channel, you never know who's going to watch. To be able to apply that to many, many others. Very, very exciting. And here it is in Little Melbourne, Florida.
You know, I was making the conversation yesterday when I was in the dentist chair and going through the cleaning. I said, you know, one of the problems I think for me was I was raised in an era, and I don't think I'm alone in this. I was raised in the era where every toothpaste commercial that came on the television would tell you want to be careful and brush your teeth so that you don't get a cavity. And I said, I really didn't realize until I had the opportunity to start going to your practice that is maybe a portion of the equation, but the more serious portion of the equation is gum health. And you don't appreciate this until you get later in life. You say, wow, if I could do that part again, I might take a different approach on a couple of things. And that's why it's so exciting to see the focus that you're doing, because you and I have done shows together where we've not only talked about like this kind of breakthrough, effort in treatment, but you've also, we've done many shows together where we've talked about the impact of oral health on your overall health and the fact that it's starting to be proven out in studies as well.
Yeah, it's true. And if we look at brushing and flossing, far more effective for periodontal disease than it is for decay. Decay is the way you control decay is eat correctly and stay away from sugar. You know, that's mainly the treatment for decay. Brushing, yeah, you should brush your teeth. Obviously, you should. But in periodontal disease, you can make a big difference with your oral hygiene because the bacteria that's within the mouth that gets trapped between the gum and the tooth can cause damage. And once it causes damage within the mouth or around the tooth, that bacteria has full entryway into the bloodstream and can go to other parts of the body and also cause problems there. So while when at the beginning of my career we were talking about keeping teeth, now we are still talking about keeping teeth with a much greater awareness of what's going on in other parts of the body. When you see bacteria in the mouth and they're only found in the mouth, and then you examine the heart and find those same bacteria, that's pretty telling.
Yeah, that's, I mean, to me, that's significant, and I think it's underreported, and that's why I think it's funny, because over the years, we've done a lot of television shows together. You publish in our Helping Seniors newsletter when we do that each month in the center of Senior Scene magazine. And in fact, our topic for today is actually a hopeless tooth that wasn't hopeless, which is actually going to be published in the February edition of the Senior Scene magazine. And there's a couple of photos, so we're going to do our best to describe our way through this. But I was thinking about this because this kind of goes back to, I guess, that line I was saying with Morgan yesterday, that I wish I had been more attentive to like what gum health means earlier on. But this is a story that you're going to tell about a case where you're talking to a lady who comes in with a loose lower front tooth, and another dentist told her it needed to be extracted. So she comes to see you guys for a second opinion. How you want to set that up and kind of explain a little bit more than just that preamble?
Yeah, he was ready to extract the tooth, and she said, but you're going to need a periodontist somewhere down the line. And I think at that point she said, well, why don't I find the periodontist right now and let's not do anything, which, most people, she had a sore tooth. It hurt. It was a lower front tooth. And when she bit down, it hurt. The gum tissue was swollen around it. And when she bit down, it was the only tooth that she was touching. So imagine when you're biting down, you can't get any other teeth in contact but that single tooth, and that was what was going on, and that was what she was feeling. And so she lived in another part of the county, and in whatever way found us, and we saw her the next day. So I see her, and I've already given you the description: swollen gum tissue around a lower front tooth. It's the only tooth that she touches, and the tooth is loose. In one way, I can't blame the dentist for saying that tooth has to come out. But let's also understand that when we choose to extract teeth, we choose to extract teeth. I mean, if a tooth has a toothache, you take the tooth out in order to be able to get rid of the toothache. But a tooth that has periodontal disease, it's we, the patients, or we, the dentists, that choose to take it out because we think the tooth is hopeless. And this was an extreme example of a hopeless tooth that was loose, and yet she has that tooth today, and that's 6 months later. So I'll talk a little bit about the process that occurred and how we did our diagnosis.
Yeah, I want to encourage folks to. You're going to have to, like I was joking, I said you're going to have to put a note on your calendar that when the February edition is released, you could be like the kid at the candy store with your nose pressed against the glass when they release the February edition of Senior Scene magazine on the 1st. It's available free, 500 locations around the county, and of course we publish it as well on our Helping Senior site, and I think so does Senior Scene magazine at its website as well. But there's a couple of photos, and I'm not real expertise, but it's kind of like a before and after photo, and it looks to me like I'm not a dentist, but it looks like there's a lot of space around the tooth in the first photo, and it just looks, you can just see it. It's pretty evident that in the after photo, it looks like there's a lot of gum tissue or something like right there, and it seems like it's a lot more sturdy or stable. Or am I saying that the right way? I
think you are. I would change the gum to bone, but essentially, we're taught, there are a lot of people who say you can't regrow bone around teeth, and in this, we're showing an X-ray when the patient came in, loose tooth, barely any bone around it. Let's take an X-ray 6 months later, there's bone around the tooth. Can bone regrow? Absolutely. Wow. It can. And that's what we're showing here, that in fact, we take a patient and we take every factor and we separate them out. So here's what we see. So we see swollen gum tissue. The tooth is loose. She doesn't even want me to do the periodontal probing around the area, and I don't blame her. It would hurt if I did. And I didn't have to. By the way, she has a full mouth of periodontal disease. I'm only concentrating on one tooth in order to be able to tell the lesson. But there were two telling problems here. Number one, the gum tissue was really, really swollen, and so there was an infection around it. The second, as I said, was it's the only tooth that she touches. And so what we do is to take every aspect of the problem and divide it out and treat each individual aspect. So when I'm seeing her and she's sore and she doesn't want to lose this tooth and she's only banging on this tooth and nothing else, what's the first thing that you would do? You would take away the bite from that tooth. And so all I did was take a little dental drill and I shaved off the top of the tooth so she couldn't bite on it anymore. Now, that kind of a process doesn't hurt. You're grinding into the enamel. There are no nerves in the enamel. I stabilized the tooth with my fingers and I just flattened the tooth so she could get her other teeth together. As soon as she did that, Kerry, or as soon as I did that, she was able to get her teeth together.
Wow.
And it didn't hurt for her to bang down on this tooth anymore. Do you think that was a sigh of relief?
You bet. You
big
bet.
Sigh of relief. Okay. So then I say, all right, listen, it's infected. I'm going to prescribe the most likely antibiotic for you. But before we do that, to make sure that I make the right decision, we're going to run a test. The brand name is called Oral DNA. We're going to have you spit in a cup and send it out to a laboratory in Minnesota, which will tell us what bacteria is growing there, so that if I don't choose the right antibiotic the first time, at least a week from now, we'll know which is the right antibiotic to use.
All right. Well, it's good. We're going to continue this conversation, a hopeless tooth that wasn't hopeless, here in just a few minutes, right here on Helping Seniors Radio.
And that music indicates we're ready to get back to the second half of our show of Helping Seniors of Brevard for this Wednesday afternoon. Let's reintroduce to you the host of the show and the executive director of Helping Seniors of Brevard, Kerry Fink. Hi, Kerry.
Hey, John Harper. Thanks again. It's always great to have our lunchtime gathering here on 90.3 FM WEJF. Welcome back if you're listening online at WEJF.net. And I always like to remind listeners who are joining us on the radio that we do podcast every episode. You can find them wherever podcasts are found, anything from iHeartRadio to Spotify to Apple iTunes and such like that. And one of the reasons we do that is because sometimes people, if they're like dashing into their car, they may have missed the first few minutes of a broadcast or something and say, wow, that's an interesting topic. Let me go back and dig out the rest of it. And that's exactly the conversation we've been having today with our special guest, Dr. Lee Sheldon, who's noted area periodontist, with Doctors Sheldon and Furtado, Solid Bite. And they've been longtime friends of the Helping Seniors organization. Dr. Sheldon personally volunteers his time on our Helping Seniors board. But one of the most important things is that he is recognized not only nationally, but internationally as sort of an expert on this. He consults with practices, helping them do what they do better. And then it kind of leads the industry in some treatment ideas and things like that. We jokingly call you, Dr. Lee Sheldon, the father of dental implants, because you were so far ahead of the game bringing those to Brevard County and kind of pioneering how that can really be worthwhile. So welcome back to the show.
Well, thank you, Kerry. You know what's interesting? Now my lecture is how do we save teeth and not put in dental implants? It doesn't mean that implants aren't useful, and we do a lot of dental implants in our office. But as you know, we've talked about this before, there are far too many teeth being extracted. And of course, we're using today's show to show an extreme example of that the body is capable of healing if you do the right things. And that's what you'll see in Senior Scene magazine. You'll see the before and after x-ray in the February edition, and that's what we're talking about today on this program.
Yeah, we titled it "A Hopeless Tooth That Wasn't Hopeless," and we're talking about if you didn't miss the prior part, I encourage you to go back and find it on a podcast. But we're talking about a lady that came into your office with a loose lower front tooth, and another dentist had told her it's got to be extracted, and so she comes to see you to kind of get a second idea of what's going on. And I wanted to kind of start back with this question. So I don't know, as a person who doesn't really understand much about this, in my head, I would think some teeth have more likelihood of being saved than others, and it seems like you're in more trouble if the tooth is up front. I don't know why, if that's even true or not, but why? I mean, even your first over the phone thought might be, well, if the tooth is that loose, maybe you can't save it. But then
I think so, and I think most people would have extracted this tooth. I really do. At this point, we've got a patient who says, I want to save this tooth if at all possible. So we have a patient who says, no, I don't want to extract the tooth, and she's willing to do the work that needs to be done. Besides that, she had periodontal disease in the rest of her mouth, which hadn't been treated, and so it doesn't cost much more to save one tooth while you're saving the rest of them. So even from a cost standpoint, there was a little bit of extra expense because we had to do some extra things on this particular tooth, but it wasn't like she was going to have to invest a lot of money. And if we compared it to what it would have cost for a dental implant, well, this is probably maybe 5% or 10% of what it would have cost cost for a dental implant. So there is certainly a financial incentive for her to at least try it, and she would risk that 5 or 10% additional fee, if you will, in order to be able to avoid a fee that would cost 9 or 10 times as much. So there was lots of reasons to do that. But essentially, we had a patient who was just banging on this one tooth. And you're right, front teeth are going to be susceptible to this because particularly lower front teeth are very short-rooted teeth, and so they can't stand much trauma. And if she's only banging on this tooth, well, she's loosening a short-rooted tooth anyway, which doesn't have so much support, and so the opportunity for that to get loose and come out is great. So you may not know a lot about dentistry, but Kerry, you know more than you think.
Well, I was smiling because I was looking at we were talking about this in the first half of the show too. That when you get your February edition of Senior Scene, you're going to see a couple of photos. It's kind of like before and after. And I had it wrong. I was saying it was gum tissue, but what you were really trying to explain is that it's pretty clear in the picture that something has changed. And you said what that is that's actually the bone kind of growing back in. And I wouldn't have realized that was really something that could even happen in a case like that. But you can just see from the photo it's healthier than it was where it started.
Yeah, you can. And so if you take these factors, number one, if you're banging only on one tooth, imagine if you were jumping up and down on your big toe. What would happen to that big toe? Well, The same thing was happening to her tooth. So the first thing you do is do something called an occlusal adjustment. Occlusal meaning bite. So I'm doing a bite adjustment on the tooth so she can't touch it anymore. And then the second thing I do is prescribe an antibiotic. And third is that I run a bacterial test to make sure that I prescribe the correct antibiotic, which, by the way, I did. So it's that confirmed that we took care of it. We saw her a week later. And so the next part with a loose tooth is, what do you want to do? How about if we just take some filling material and attach it to the two teeth on either side? You know, if you had a broken arm, you'd put a splint or you'd put a cast on your arm. When you and I were young, it was a cast. Now it's now they're prefab jobs rather than the custom plaster cast that weighed a ton. But the same thing, just keep it from moving so it has the opportunity to heal. So she saw my son, she saw Matthew, and Matthew splinted or attached that tooth with some tooth-colored filling material and just stuck that tooth to the two teeth on either side of the space. So now it can't move. And then she sees Frank. Frank is one of our hygienists, a superb hygienist who's excellent in using the endoscope, and went to Frank, and Frank cleaned the tooth up.
Wow.
And then we just saw her for reevaluation. And what you're seeing and what you'll see in Senior Scene magazine is what the tooth looked like 6 months ago and what the tooth looks like today. And without doing any bone grafting, all we did was take care of all of the factors. Tooth was loose, we adjusted the bite. Tooth was loose, we attached it to the other tooth. Tooth was infected, we prescribed an antibiotic. Tooth was infected, we cleaned the root surface really well, and bone came back. And that is something that can happen much more often than we think. And so if somebody tells you that you have a hopeless tooth, that periodontally there's nothing that can be done, if you can chew on that tooth. Now, I'm taking an extreme example here where she couldn't even chew on the tooth, it hurt. But if you can chew on that tooth, and particularly if it's the first tooth that you're taking out in that arch, think about that real carefully and see if you can't save that tooth. Because if you can save that tooth, that prevents you from wearing a partial denture, perhaps getting dental implants, doing bridge work, and all sorts of things. In other words, don't unless a tooth is so sore you can't chew on it, don't take it out. Go see a periodontist, see if periodontist might be able to save it.
Well, that actually brings me to a point of just saying, like, in general, before you do the worst possible thing, yank the tooth, maybe at least take the time to get an opinion and see what's really going on here. I was smiling as you were going through the story. I was thinking, like, it's, kind of like a lot of times we'll watch a real estate show and somebody will take, what would appear to be an old broken down house, and then they put a little TLC into it, and all of a sudden it's a beautiful house that sells for record price in the neighborhood. And I'm thinking there's probably an analogy here somehow about tooth. Like if you have a tooth and it can be saved, doesn't it make a lot of sense, from a cost standpoint, from a health standpoint and everything else? If it's plausible, why not give that a shot? I think you said it was a fraction of the cost of what it might be if they had to go the implant route. And so it would seem like worthy to try that before you go to the extreme measure, which if it's needed, it is needed, but at least you could try this first.
It's true. And the word hopeless is used very, very liberally in dental care. Oh, that can't be saved. Nothing can be done for that, blah, blah, blah. And we talked about the difference between nothing can be done for it versus I can't do anything. I don't know how to do anything for it. Maybe there's somebody that can. So you got to be careful, particularly when it comes to periodontal disease, of taking that first opinion. There are a lot of people, and I'm talking about a lot of dentists who would choose to extract teeth that can otherwise be saved. It's interesting, I have that YouTube channel. By the way, you want to go to my YouTube channel, it's at Lee Sheldon 833. Go to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/at Lee Sheldon 833. And where I talk about cases, and I talk about cases that we treat, and it's and the way I've developed it, I try to do it using my radio voice and using my radio lingo. So I'm not talking I'm not using dental language. I'm not speaking to dentists. I'm speaking both to potential patients and to dentists as well. Interesting that we just got somebody who contacted us from New Jersey as a result of my YouTube channel. We have a dental student at University of Connecticut who's contacted me saying, I want to be that kind of periodontist. So Wow. It's amazing what a YouTube channel can do. We got somebody, I think somebody last night called from Tallahassee. So I didn't realize that. By the way, you're probably better off with my finding you somebody who's qualified in your own area rather than fly down from New Jersey or even come down from Tallahassee. I can find somebody good for you where you are. As a matter of fact, very often we get these outside consultations. I don't see the patient. I don't want to see the patient right away. We can do a Zoom meeting and just send me your x-rays and your periodontal probings, give me the charting, and you and I will have a Zoom meeting together, and I can give you some advice on what to do. You don't have to come down and visit us. Some people choose to, which is nice, but, better to find somebody who's really qualified in your area, and there are qualified people in every area. And for those people who are listening to this or watching this on YouTube, really listening to this on YouTube, or on Spotify or any of our platforms, we can find good periodontists for you in any part of the country or every part of the country.
I'm smiling as you're going through that because we've had the same experience, helping seniors at Brevard. Dr. Sheldon, as you know better than anybody, we're 100% local to Brevard County charity. Our services are geared specifically for seniors and their families here in this area, not at the exclusion of anybody else. It's just we really believe, Joe has always kind of had the mandate, and we certainly agree and follow that because experience shows that you need to deal with people in your community. Because, for example, one of the examples I like to use, we have some very good organizations that help seniors find the appropriate senior living for them. And so here in Brevard County, we have 140 plus places that you could consider. So if you call one of those 800 numbers, you saw an ad on TV and they say, we have a great place for mom or dad or whatever, and they're going to look on their little database the same way you might do a search on your own computer. It's not the same as somebody going in the front door and having that personal interaction. They know who the executive directors are for each facility, which ones are on the upswing, which ones are taking care of everybody the right way, and all those things. And then they are also able to match people correctly. So we really believe in that idea of local. But back to the point of the story was the fact that we have a lady who's an expert at reverse mortgages. In fact, she had to take a lot of time to try to explain to Joe what what makes a reverse mortgage legitimate versus some of the stuff that went on very early in the career, which was a little sketchy. And so we do, as you know, Dr. Sheldon, we do a lot of videos on our YouTube channel, Helping Senior Brevard. And so her name is Barbara McIntyre, and she gets a call one day from somebody who had been watching the video and says, I'm watching you. And she said, well, that sounds a little creepy. And no, I don't mean it like that. I'm here in California, but I like how you explained what was going on. That's the first time somebody wasn't just selling me on it, but they were really explaining me the things I need to know for. And I'd like your help in that. And of course, she had to explain that, licensing, you have to be licensed state by state. And the guy goes, oh, that's okay. But at least if I can ask you some general questions, it's really going to help me. And as you were sharing that story, that's the world we live in with YouTube and the tools, the technology that we have, because we'll get calls, maybe even about this show, from somebody who might be living in the Midwest or something like that, but they're concerned about their parents who are living here in Florida. And we see that all the time, Dr. Sheldon.
Yeah, I think it's good. It's good and bad in a way, but it's mostly good that it gives people opportunities of seeing something out there that they may not be able to experience in their local community, or they don't know who to go to within their local community to be able to provide the services that, for example, Barbara McIntyre can provide for you here. And so it opens your eyes as to what can be done, and then you do a little search and you can find somebody in your local community who can do the same thing. Why do those of us who are on the lecture circuit go on the lecture circuit? In order to be able to teach others that are similar to us to be able to do the same thing that we do. Our purpose is not to keep this a secret. Our purpose is to get that information out there so that other people of our professions, whether it's dental profession or any other profession, can see what was done, how it worked, what was successful about it. By the way, what wasn't successful as well, which is very important in the lecture circuit. Part of the lecture circuit is I will tell people what I've done. But the other part, particularly from the podium, and it's not always that much fun, is that when people challenge me from the audience, I better be able to come up with answers. And why am I being challenged? Because that person in the audience thinks he or she did the same thing as I did and got a different result. And so then the question becomes much more pointed. All right, what did you do? What's the difference between what you did and what I'm doing? And by the way, what I do doesn't always work 100% of the time. It doesn't. And we have to warn the patient of that it may not work. And if that doesn't work, then we have alternative number 2 if alternative 1 doesn't work. All of that is handled, but that's how I learned. When I got here, and I got here when I was 30 years old. I don't know if you know that. I'm a little bit older than 30 now. But when I got here when I was 30, what was so neat is that I could call the upper echelon people in our field, in the field of periodontics, and those people would come to the phone and answer my questions. It was so good. I didn't realize how tight our profession is and how these people who at that time I considered to be famous, and they were famous within the profession, would come to the phone and answer my questions.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, so I've got I've got the student right now, the student that I was referring to. He and I met on the phone. We talked for about 45 minutes 3 weeks ago, and we're going to talk again on Thursday again about cases and patients. Of course, I want to share this knowledge with everybody I can.
Yeah, that's really a great part of it, is actually sharing the wealth, if you will. It's like taking the gold of the experience that you've got and then making it available so that it's helping a wider swath of people. And that was a question I want to say. I know we've done shows before, Dr. Sheldon, where you said too many implants are being done. And I thought that's kind of provocative from somebody who's kind of a leader in doing all that. But you've gotten some blowback maybe from some people even on the YouTube channel where they're saying, like, oh, they should really just have an implant. And it seems like from the conversation we've had, I know a lot of times you'll watch a TV and you'll see all these things. Oh, you should just have an implant. You should just have an implant. And your story, your drumbeat throughout all of this has all been maybe, but not so fast. Let's always take a look at what's really going on here.
It's true. And particularly with periodontal disease, there's also a disease called periimplantitis. Okay, so what's periodontal disease? Deterioration of the bone around the tooth. What's periimplantitis? Deterioration of the bone around a dental implant. And what's interesting is that those people who tend to lose bone around teeth also tend to lose bone around dental implants. Those dental implants are more likely to become infected. And so if I have the immediate simple thing is take out the tooth or 2 teeth or 3 teeth and put 1 or 2 implants in and just put that in there and it's going to be fine. Well, what's going to happen 5 and 10 years down the line? And if I have the opportunity, if the patient is going to be prone to peri-implant disease, then isn't it better if we can save the tooth? I can save a tooth. And I, as a periodontist or a root canal specialist, an endodontist, can save a tooth much more readily than we can save a dental implant. Saving a dental implant that's diseased is pretty tough.
Wow. These are the things that they don't really tell you. I mean, the TV commercials always make it look great and simple, but, it does seem like you really need to do your homework and understand what's going on. I wanted to ask, as a follow-up, it looks like this lady is doing really well from the picture, but you also explained that, it started with the 1 tooth in the front, but there were problems kind of going on, throughout her mouth. By taking that whole mouth approach, has it worked out for her?
It has. She has not lost 1 tooth. She has severe periodontal disease throughout the rest of her mouth. She's 47 years old, so she's young. And to have this much disease, I don't know how she got to the point where she had that much disease. I don't remember that part of it. But yes, we were able to intervene. All of it was non-surgical. And essentially, we took the same approach that we did on this very simple or this very loose, small tooth in the front. And we took the same approach every place else, and she's done fantastically well. And so now we're seeing her. We're going to see her every 3 months for a while. We took a full mouth series of x-rays 6 months later to verify that in fact things were going well. This is a disease that we have to manage, and so we have to continue to see the patient to make sure it stays under control. We certainly have to encourage them with their oral hygiene, but the most important part of this, an important part of this, is making sure that root is totally clean. And that's where a very skilled hygienist, and in my opinion, the use of the scope, which allows the hygienist to get around corners and be able to see the calculus of the hard deposits on the roots, can make all the difference in the world and can take a case that could be considered hopeless in other hands and make it fully treatable in ours.
Yeah, there's no question about it, Dr. Sheldon. And, that brings up a point that's very, that's worthwhile, or at least it's helpful, I think, to us. It's helpful to somebody who's listening who would take advantage of this. And it's also, I think, a great tool for you. It's a program that you created that kind of gets to the heart of the matter and helps us really establish where we are health-wise as far as our mouth goes. And then I'm talking about the program that you do called Solid Bite Gives Back. And it's a program that you kind of spearheaded all these years ago. It's created hundreds of thousands of dollars for charities in Brevard County, of which Helping Seniors is really glad to have been a recipient of it. But I really like the program because it offers so much benefit to the person who takes advantage of it. We've been talking about why it's important to get that opinion about what's going on in your mouth. Talk about the program itself, Dr. Sheldon.
Well, the reason we put this program in place is because I wanted all the diagnostic materials at my disposal. And if I was going to charge a patient $500 or $600 or $700 for all those diagnostic materials, people would call the office and say, well, it's going to cost $700 for an examination. And they say, well, good, I'll go someplace else where I can get it for a lot cheaper. So I said, all right, let's make a win-win out of this. Let's take Helping Seniors of Brevard and give me $50 so I can get all the diagnostic material that I want, so I can examine you properly and to be able to give you a full impression of what's going on all over your mouth. And a lot of people come in and they need nothing, which I think is the best thing in the world. But at least it gives me the opportunity of getting all the diagnostic material I want. And so instead of paying us the money, then you bring a check, and now we're doing it on charge cards, and eventually we'll probably be doing it on on cash payment apps as well. But right now we're doing charge cards. And you come in and you write a check or you give $50 or more to Helping Seniors of Brevard. You get the full examination, a full mouth x-ray, CT scan. More importantly, my staff and doctors are just fantastic. I'm kind of the senior guy here, but I'm so proud of what they're doing. You get to experience a dental experience that most people will say I've never experienced before, and you'll get a full impression of what's going on, how you should plan for the future, and what needs to be done in order to be able to allow you to keep your teeth for a lifetime, or to replace the teeth if in fact some or all of the teeth need to be replaced.
Wow. That's what I said. It's kind of like a win-win-win. It helps us as a little charity because I always tell people as a charity, we are only able to serve as far as people will help us to do. That's why we're always, yakking about fundraisers, because we got to have the help to be able to do what we do. This is a great way to do that because it helps you as a medical professional get the information you need to do your job in the best way possible. It certainly helps us as a charity because it helps us keep the doors open and keep the services flowing. But really, for the patient is the real winner in this because they're getting the benefit of something of like you explained, many hundreds of dollars. We've talked about it. You get the CT scan. You get all these different tools that really will leave them with a sense of exactly what's the best way to approach whatever. And if there's one lesson we could take away from today's conversation is even when it looked kind of like it was hanging on by its hairy edge, you were able to apply expertise in sound periodontal practices and save that tooth.
That's correct. And we went into this with her fully realizing that tooth might have to be extracted. So you go into this up front. Do you want to take the chance with me? Come on, let's do it. And we did it. And wow, grew bone around a tooth without doing a bone graft or anything. Took a tooth that had no bone support or almost no bone support, and a lot of bone support is back. So neat, so neat. It's such a gratifying profession, and she is just thrilled.
It's a great story, and I can't wait for people to see the story and actually be able to see the pictures in the February Senior Scene magazine. If somebody wants to take advantage of the Solid Bite Give Back, let's give that number so people would know what their next step would be to be able to do that.
Yeah, please do. Give us a call at 321-259-8000, and anybody in the office will be able to help you. Just say, I heard Dr. Sheldon on Helping Seniors of Brevard Radio, and I want that Helping Seniors of Brevard special, and they'll know exactly what to do.
That's perfect. Well, thank you, Dr. Sheldon. Just before we go, I want to share something fun that's coming up on this Friday. So we are talking, this is Dr. Sheldon. I mentioned this at the beginning of the show. I'm kind of excited about this. We're always looking for programs that are going to make a difference for seniors. And, last year we took over a program that otherwise was going to go away. It was called the Senior Santa Program. It made such a difference for hundreds of seniors who otherwise would have literally had no Christmas just because they didn't have anybody else to think of them at Christmas time. And Jennifer Barton, who has always been such a blessing to our organization, really stepped up and helped make all that happen. She corralled all the volunteers that happened. Well, here's another opportunity that's coming up now on this Friday. This is a program that AARP of Florida is pulling together. They've actually done this very, very successfully in other areas, and I'm so excited that we're partnering with them as it comes here into Brevard County. It's called Walk with a Doc, and it's going to be a monthly walk. It starts, the first one is this Friday morning, and the way it's set up, Dr. Sheldon, is that first of all, everybody says, get a little exercise. You can go walk a little bit, and sometimes we are motivated to do that, and sometimes we aren't. But here, you get to actually walk with a doc. So as you're walking, you can ask a couple of health questions and things that you otherwise might be intimidated in, or it's tough to get enough time with the doctor or whatever. And then it's also kind of socialization, because you're going to meet a lot of new people. So this is all coming up, Dr. Sheldon, on Friday, the 10th. It's going to become a second Friday of each month thing. We don't even have to walk outside. This is Florida. Let's do this today we don't need air conditioning, but many times we do. So we're actually doing this in Merritt Square Mall. And so there is a wonderful ARNP who's Lydia Rivera, and she is a family medicine expert, and she's going to be leading this along. And so the folks from ARP are going to be there. We're going to be there. They're promising T-shirts for everybody who comes out. It's absolutely free. T-shirts. There's going to be snacks. There's going to be pedometers. You don't want to miss it. It's going to be happening at Merritt Square Mall. It's this Friday. Come out and join us. 9 a.m. Merritt Square Mall. We'll see you there, and we'll see you next Wednesday back here for Helping Seniors Radio. Thanks, Dr. Sheldon.